Hey everybody, another episode coming out this week. Very exciting content for you all. And we have a special first-time guest, just to clarify, because Brian now assumes that he is a regular rotation here.
He's a recurring character.
So joining us today, we have Amy Koncar, which if you're one of our agents or you do business with us, you have probably had email interactions or phone calls or something like that with Amy, I would imagine. So,
yeah, for the most part.
Yep. All right, so Amy is our onboarding, licensing, contracting supervisor. So she oversees actually a small team of staff members who really focus on everything from not only the front end part of onboarding and getting your contracts tied or affiliated with our organization, but also a lot of behind the scenes, the ongoing work that we do from an administrative perspective to keep you in good standing with carriers. And it's maybe more than you think. And I think that's the reason that we're actually pumping out this episode for you all. So.
Yeah, most people probably don't understand how much time and effort and nuance there is that goes into contracting with different carriers. So we wanted to give everybody a peek behind the curtain, so to say. And then we also kind of wanted to give you all as agents some understanding, so maybe you have a little bit more context or empathy towards your upline or the carriers, and kind of give you, the real frank talk that people don't necessarily, give you all the time.
Yeah, and I think too that there's this element of the business that agents don't understand, and I don't understand it either, but a lot of FMOs or distributors or carriers, they don't talk about it. There's almost like that side of the business that people feel is very secretive. And, part of our intention of doing these is kind of be very transparent and put the information out there. And so, again, that's the reasoning behind it, because there are no secrets. We don't think it's secretive. We just need to provide a little bit more information to you all. So let's jump in.
Real quick, Amy, why don't you tell us how you landed with Agent Boost and how you got into the exciting world of insurance agent contracting?
Yeah, so I was looking for a new path in life, a new group of people to spend my outside of home life with. And my husband actually saw your post saying that you needed a contracting person. It's a different industry that I was in, but basically same work. So I applied, and you guys thought I was good enough to hack it.
Yeah, so a lot of times...
Good choice. It was a good decision.
Yeah. A lot of times we find, in company hires, a lot of our best team members have been people that we've either headhunted or plucked or recruited, or friends that we pulled into the industry, or acquaintances. And I think that's important as a company, is to have both, right? The dynamic of we care mostly about quality human beings, their aptitude, their attitude, and you can
fit.
teach them, because nobody ever goes into school and is like, you know what I want to be when I grow up? An insurance contracting specialist.
Right. Yeah, it's not a thing. And you're right, for a lot of positions, not just yours or others here at the company, we find that, look, if we have a need that we have to identify, we have to place somebody there, we have a role open, that's going to be us finding just the right person to fit into the company, and then a lot of months or sometimes years of training to get that person the skill set that they need. And they're just not plug and play. So to your point, we're typically having to groom or develop somebody before they become highly proficient at a role. But I would say in the contracting department, and I've said it before, you start to get fairly proficient at it after a month or two. But I think that to be like extremely knowledgeable and really know with all the carriers that we're working with, I would say sometimes it's a year before somebody's actually like really extremely on top of it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of it is just learning as you go, being put in the situation, having to figure it out. So, you're only going to learn all of the ins and outs by actually doing it yourself and trial and error, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And
I would also say it doesn't make our lives easier, because we're always adding new carriers.
Yeah.
All the insurance companies, carriers, vendors, partners, they'll have a very different process. And let's be honest, then they change them too. And it's, we'll have even partners. And I think right now we contract and onboard with like 90 carriers. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a lot.
Probably 90. So, we have about 90 insurance companies. So when agents approach us and say, hey, we want to do business, we want to be affiliated with Agent Boost Marketing, you know, on the onboarding packet, they'll be able to select different carriers that they want to represent or sell products for. And we have about 90. And so again, going back to that is sometimes you'll find that these carriers will have a similar platform or vendor that they use where it's the same. Other times it's distinctly different. Sometimes we're sending in paper that we're copying and scanning, faxing sometimes almost, and sometimes I feel like we're sending a carrier pigeon where I'm attaching a piece of paper and sending a pigeon to some of these carriers to onboard.
Right.
It's
and they're multi-billion-dollar companies. Yeah.
we laugh about it all the time. There are some insurance companies and their process is so bad that is literally almost like snail mail, or I might as well stick it, you know, in a burro or a donkey and send it across the country to them to go deliver. You know, it's bad.
Yeah, I think that's important to point out because a lot of people, when they hear like, oh, I'm going to get contracting, I think that they think that they fill out, it's like signing up for their, you know, their newest subscription on their phone or whatever, and they fill out a 30-second application, and then it's like, oh, it automatically goes to all these different insurance carriers and populates all the information, and everything happens in this magical way, the SaaS process, and everything aligns all perfectly. And it's important to know that literally every carrier has a completely different process and timelines, and there's a lot of human work that still goes into it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm going to add before you respond, and then I'll let you follow up. That's the ideal. That's the dream. And we used to use a product called Surance Bay back in the day, and that was the idea is that we would aggregate information on a contracting form and have this field match the carrier's field, and we would aggregate all that on the onboarding form and use this platform to populate the information on our contract on all of the carrier paper, and you can onboard with 30 carriers like that. And it was a great idea. But then the problem is that every single one of these insurance carriers started saying, no, we don't want you doing that. We want this, you know, link. We're going to use this process. We want it going directly to the broker. We want their wet signature or their timestamp on it. We don't want to accept you populating that because, you know, I'm just going to suspect that back in the day, there were some distributors, FMOs, or entities that were just populating out documents and pumping out, getting writing numbers for agents that they maybe never agreed to or didn't want to be onboarded with, or maybe they wanted a North American contract, but, you know, the distributor onboarded them with 30 financial, you know, companies instead of just the one, and it created issues. And so I think that unwound a lot of those processes. So anyways, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just every single carrier has a different process, and we have to manually send all of those. And every carrier wants different information. Some of them, it's a quick, we go on, fill it out, and the agent immediately gets their link. Others, it's a 4-step process that takes 48 to 72 hours before we actually have the link to the agent, and that's on a good timeline.
Yeah. Right. One of the things that we've talked about, too, that I think it's important to point out is each agent is its own unique set of circumstances and workflows as well, because depending on the state where the agent lives, the products that they're going to sell, and their current situation of their contracts, whether they're encumbered or aligned with somebody or not, every circumstance is different. And every agent, it's almost like we have to go through this investigation process or this syncing up process of finding where these agents are at, here's what contracts you have, here's what you want to get, here's each one of those is in a different status or process, and then our team has to go and get those all aligned or move over. And that's incredibly complex, you know, especially when you start talking about hundreds or thousands of agents. You can just start doing the math on 90 different carriers and hundreds of agents, how many different actual contract alignments there can possibly be.
Yeah, so we had to build in our P&Ps, and I've spent time with Amy and her predecessor and multiple people, and we've had to build in P&Ps where we kind of go, okay, here's the carrier, look at where is the NPN of the agent coming from. Is it an agent or is it a TIN? Is it an entity or a person? And were they previously contracted or no? And if they were previously contracted, with whom or where? And based on all those things, you'll have to do different steps and different timelines and different forms and different everything. So it is to your point, quite a pain.
Yeah.
Right?
What percentage of agents do we see now? I have my guess in my head that are just, we usually call them like fresh or virgin contracts where they're unaligned and they can just freely get set up. How do we ever see that?
Yeah.
Not super
If we get them in the
often.
industry, right? If we get them contracted and we're the ones that get them licensed.
Yeah, I would say that it's more common that we see people that it's kind of a mixed bag. Some carriers, they've never had them before. Other carriers, they're already contracted. So they may be able to get onboarded and start selling with some of the carriers. And then we've got to wait that 90 days or however long for the other carriers to push through and go active.
Yeah, I would say I also want to kind of back it up to the beginning of the contracting process too, to say from our end, we actually made a fundamental decision years ago that we were not going to process any paper contracts. Like about a couple of years ago, if you remember, we had a couple agents fax in an onboarding packet, and I just said, no, we're just, I apologize if anybody's listening and they're offended by this, but I just said, look, if you can't complete our online link and it's like a DocuSign that we use, and we built like an online onboarding form. If an agent struggles with that and they can't upload documents and attach things to it and do it, it's just, there's a certain barrier of entry into our industry. It's very complicated working with a lot of these different companies and technologies and enrollment tools. And I just made the decision to say, if you can't get through the front door even using technology, you're just not going to be able to make it in the industry. Do
you remember what was the tipping point for that?
I don't know. You're going to put me on the spot.
I won't say the person's name, but there was an agent that lived in the sticks of Alabama that was like driving over, had to cross state lines to drive to the local FedEx Kinko's
and fax us documents.
It was 45 miles away and fax us his packet, and then.
But there happened to be 3, I think, in a 2-week period, and I just was like, "We're out of this." I was like,
"This ain't going to work for you, fella."
Yeah, we can't do this, and not only that, but we've been more of like a tech-driven FMO, and we've been doing it for years, to where I'm not saying that we don't want business. I mean, paper applications have their place, but I didn't want to be running the organization with the whole floor of support reps that were scrubbing paper applications, looking for errors and sending it back to the agent and being like, oh, you missed line here. You didn't get the initial. You got to fix this application. I did not want to be in that business.
It's 2024.
We're out of it. So that was part of it. So it's all online. It's in a DocuSign. We separate kind of Medicare and ACA carriers. We kind of organize it very easy. We do put a lot of information, obviously, in our onboarding packet that people are consenting and giving us, the ability to fix their signatures on documents. They do want to onboard. There's multiple spots in our packet where they have to sign and acknowledge. We try to make everything very transparent, where there's no gotchas. We talk about blackout periods, releases. We put all of that on our onboarding packet right in the upfront, because I think that we're trying to be very transparent about all that. Right?
Yeah.
Did I miss anything on that?
No, I think that's good. And that's actually been really nice for us in the contracting department, because we get those questions from agents. Mm-hmm. And it's really nice to be able to refer back and say, here's a screen grab of exactly what you signed. I'm sorry that you didn't understand it,
right,
but this is what you signed, and you acknowledged that you're going to uphold your end of the agreement too.
Yeah, and just as like a side note for people out there, the way we built it, it's like a DocuSign type tool where, essentially when they're done executing it, the agent gets a copy of their contract that they just executed with us. We get a contract. And then anytime, if we have sub-agency partners out there, in the industry, we refer to them a lot as GAs or MGAs, we'll actually brand a packet for you. And we do this for our partners, where we'll actually get your logo, we'll build in your packet for you. That way, it's customized. You can choose whether you want your agents to know you're working with Agent Boost Marketing, or if you want to kind of white label that and have it, where they don't know that we're your FMO. We white label those packets, and that way we also know when you send that unique link or URL to your agents, that's how we know that it's one of your agents. This agent or NPN is tied to your organization, so that's how we actually execute, and we're very efficient at running all those sub-agency onboarding packets as well.
Yeah, yeah, and it's nice. It comes over on our end, completely different, telling us exactly what agency they're with, so that we can set it up correctly in our system, and then our system also references that.
Yeah, and candidly, we'll have Agent Boost Marketing has 90 carriers, but maybe the sub-agency partner only has 13 carriers. We'll build that packet with just those 13 carriers specific for the sub-agency group. So we've really, like I said, I'm at least proud to say I know a lot about contracting because unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, I've had to be involved in building that from the ground up over the years.
Yeah, that was one of our first major obstacles as we grew was finding a person that had the caliber and the ability to wrap their head around the contracting. That was seriously obstacle numero uno when we started growing nationwide.
Yeah, it's true. And there's not people out there who can step in and train you and teach you. You really have to figure it out as you go. And I would even say that that was one of my weaknesses back years ago, was writing and implementing good like PMPs, like as far as policies and procedures of X or Y or Z. And now we've grown so much and there's been so much scale that I've had to force myself, even though I hate it, I've had to force myself to become great at writing PMPs. So
yeah, I wanted to kind of talk about, when agents come to us, usually, they come to us with an agency or a sub-agency, or they hear one of our recruiting webinars, or they come to us, and we generally feel like we try to set the table for the expectations of their contracting package. And, a lot of times people will come to my weekly recruiting webinar and I'll spend extra time talking about, what to expect and, what we do as an FMO, because like Dan said, there's a lot of these little sub agencies and things like that. They probably don't have an Amy or a contracting team inside of they're relying on their top of hierarchy, an organization or entity like us that has a contracting team. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot of work for somebody, not just at the FMO or your top of hierarchy's place, but also on the carrier side of things too, And so I think for a lot of agents, and I see posts out on Facebook groups all the time, and just being on the FMO side of things, it's something that really frustrates me because I see it all the time. And they're like, this entity, is taking too long to process my contract, or I want to release already, and blah, 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 blah. And so we just spend a lot of time educating the agents up front and going, hey, it takes time to get these contracts aligned. You have to have somebody that's actually doing manual labor and work and contracting on your behalf, and you're having to follow up with that person and make sure they're walking through the steps, because each process is a little bit different. And we as an entity are investing a significant amount of money and time and resources into staff and infrastructure and tech stacks and policies. And the insurance carriers that you're trying to do business with are doing the same thing on their end, where they have an Amy or a like kind of person on the carrier side of things that we're working with to actually get you set up with that. And so I want agents to understand that it actually takes a lot of resources. Yep. When you decide that you want to onboard or that you want to contract with an upline, there is actual work that goes in. So when you're doing that, you're basically setting into motion a lot of time, effort, and money into getting you set up. And as we've covered many times on the podcast before, the only way that an entity like us or your upline makes any money in general is when you sell. Yep. And so that was just kind of something I wanted to. So be cognizant of what it takes time-wise and effort when you are contracting or onboarding with somebody.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing that people don't realize is how much time it takes. Just to get all of the links requested and sent out to people, I would say is probably, if they've got 10 contracts, probably 6 to 8 hours of work just to get the links out. And then if they want, hey, I've done all of these links, give me a status update. We actually have to then manually go in and look at all of the different carriers, which then takes an additional, sometimes hour, to get everything set up and give them a screenshot of where their stuff is.
Yeah, and guys, there's state and regulatory entities that you need to get appointed with. There's all sorts of compliance things. There's government, federal regulatory entities.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. They think it's just, okay, contract me, go, and you push
button and it's done. All of a sudden, yeah, you're aligned.
Well, why won't you give me a release? Well, because we've spent 100 labor hours for the last 2 months getting your stuff. So there's a lot.
Let's talk about releases to end.
Yeah, we will, but there's a lot. It's just not like click a button and you're done. I mean, there's just a lot. And the other thing that we tell everybody is, look, during this process, I would say on average, it takes about 2 weeks to get a writing number if, depending on the carrier, if they don't have anything holding them up, like a previous entity, upline, FMO, employer, they're just fresh. It usually takes about 2 weeks because remember, there's also a background check. So usually there's not like some national database that all these insurance carriers like play nice with one another. They all individually will run a background on that person's social security number. And also they run against the states. So the more state licenses that you have, the longer that background period takes. Is that correct, Amy?
Yeah.
So sometimes, it'll be frustrating, like, well, this person got their writing number in only, 11 days, and I've been waiting for 2 weeks. And I was like, that person has 2 licenses. You have 37. That's the reason that it's taking longer. If you don't like that answer, I'm sorry, that is the answer. And that's the reason, and it's not us. We actually, I will tell you, like, we're very efficient. I check, how often do I ask you, what is the inbox out? What's the queue like? What are the activities like? How often do I ask you that?
Probably once a week or every other week.
I am always going over to our contracting department to say, give me an update on our number of activities and our inbox. And I literally have this mission to where I feel like whenever we get a contract or anything with licensing, the expectation is that we're always on it in 24 to 48 hours. That is like the expectation. And so I would say that the business ebbs and flows, but we've done a really great job of at least following that protocol. And if a contract comes in or like an update request or something like that, I have never seen it take, in the past 2 years, I haven't seen it take days and days to get back to somebody.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we've been on top of it.
Yeah.
So that's great. So I would say plan on a fresh contract taking 2 weeks. And then again, there's going to be encumbrances sometimes. And the other thing is it relies on the agent. The other thing that I would tell you I've observed is just the agents submit their contract to Agent Boost. They go, sent, I'm done. That's all I have to do. And the challenge with that is it's not accurate. That obviously we, at that point, get it. Within that 24 to 48 hour period, we're going to look at that packet to see which carriers they selected. And then we actually always try to get on a Zoom and set like an expectation with that agent and say, hey, here's these 5 or 6 carriers. Like, we got it. We got everything we need. We're going to send it off to them. However, these ones, we're going to have to send you a link. It's going to go to your inbox. We even tried to be very creative years ago and use like our own email address for all of our packets and just do that and complete it for the agents. We can't do that, right? The carriers don't allow us. So it has to be a unique email address. So we have to send it to the agent's email. They have to sometimes click on the link, either acknowledge or sometimes redundantly fill out another onboarding package. And I'm sure the agents are like, why do I have to do this if I'm sure you get some flack, right?
Yep.
Why am I having to do this? But if you're not doing those steps and you're not responding and you have links sitting in your inbox or whatever else, then it's not going to move forward. So we've even been in situations where we set automations and triggers and reminders. We're texting people, we're emailing them, we're calling them. And, 2 months goes by, they've responded to nothing. And they're going, well, where's my writing number? It's been 2 months.
No, my favorite is what I got today. I have a policy that I need to write for an April 1st effective in 2 days. Yeah. When is this going to be done, or where? Well, you didn't do any of the stuff or any of the links, so not today.
Right.
As a generality, I would say that most salespeople are not highly focused and don't love doing administrative tasks. As a general statement.
Correct, but
I completely agree.
But a takeaway for agents of this is, whether you're onboarding with us or somebody else, be responsible. If you know you want to work with these 10 carriers, have some ownership over that task too, and work with whoever it is, whether it be our staff or somebody else, your upline, and make sure that like, okay, my United's going to be good to go. This is what, and take some ownership over those tasks and some responsibility over your career and your business, right? Because as we just talked about, us and other entities are getting compounding requests to the tunes of thousands and thousands of contract requests. And ultimately, it's your business. You need to be the one that steps up and takes ownership of that as well, on the contracting side of things.
Yeah, I would say on average, though, too, so that we know, and I appreciate that, and you're right, and we tell everybody the more proactive that you are, the more you're looking for those links, the more that you're staying on top of it, the quicker you get through all this pain and get to the other side and you get your writing numbers. Because the other thing too is sometimes I'm going to use United Healthcare just as an example. We'll send out links. They have to complete the link, and then after that, they're going to get a party ID. They're not going to get a writing ID. They get a party ID, which is like temporary. Yeah. And here's one of the biggest things that I see happen too, is they get their party ID, and they're like, now I can go write business. No, that's for you to log into your portal and do your certifications. Yeah. You at least need to log in, sync to AHIP, click through your portal, and have your AHIP tie into your portal, or complete a module and do something first before United Healthcare will continue with the backgrounding process and the onboarding process. And if the agent does not do that step, it just sits there in limbo with a party ID as a temporary, and then that number will just expire after 90 days.
I think most of them are 90 days.
Yeah, and then it just expires. And basically it's like you never even did the contract request at that point, and we start over. Yeah. And I will tell you too, they'll do it second time and a third time, and if an agent does that 3 times to United Healthcare, from what I've seen, unless they've changed their policy, they will just say, we will not onboard this agent ever again. After fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 3 times, we're not even going to push this paper out ever again.
Yeah.
So one thing that I don't know what's on your notes, but one thing I wanted to bring up is the actual rules and contracting processes, how they vary from product line to product line. For example, Medicare carriers, ACA carriers, and life insurance carriers have different processes of like contracting, and if you're, self-release process and things like that. And Medicare, we've been through this evolution, and what I'm seeing right now is the ACA world is going through this same evolutionary contracting process that the Medicare industry had to go through, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. And it's really kind of frustrating in some ways to see some of the release policies and the contracting and onboarding differences that they have from ACA side of things to the Medicare side of things, even though the carriers are the same carriers.
Right.
And so, historically, when Dan and I first got in the industry, if you wanted to leave a Medicare carrier, you had to go dark, meaning you couldn't
write any business.
You couldn't write any business if you wanted to switch from one upline to upline, and we had to go through that very difficult process multiple times. But now, as a generality, the Medicare carriers all have some sort of self-release process where if your upline isn't going to release you, or you can't get a release, or where your contract's encumbered and you don't know who or where it's at, you can put in an intent to transfer with these different carriers throughout most of the time of the year and still move your contract over. And so the industry on the Medicare side has evolved to that, and we're still maybe not quite there on the ACA side of things.
I think it's an understatement. Yeah, I would say back in the day, and I'm going to be polite and leave names out, but there were 2 carriers that I had to wait and go dark 12 months. I had to not write business for 12 months with one, and another one I had to actually just terminate my contract altogether, voluntarily just terminate, and then wait another 12 months and then re-onboard with a new entity. So yeah, back in the day, things were very, very brutal, trying to move. Like we always, refer to it as more like being an indentured servant, where you're just stuck with somebody forever for the rest of eternity, which we think is a terrible practice, because we do recognize that as an FMO, we put forth this time and money and effort and labor and technology into onboarding, but that doesn't give somebody the right to just hold them forever for no good reason.
Yep.
Right. So that's kind of been my philosophy is more to, if you're doing business the right way and you're treating the agent right, you're not going to lose them anyway. It's just generality, and that's our philosophy. But there were agents, like I would say, if you look back a few years ago, that would just hold an agent forever and just never give a release. And it was a bad practice and a bad policy, because, the carriers don't want to redundantly churn out and have to re-onboard the same producer who's writing business for them.
Right.
But at the same time, there were these situations where agents were being taken advantage of, not paid appropriately, maybe not given the right opportunity to grow their business, and they need to be able to choose their partner they want to do business with in general. Right.
Yeah, and so the ACA side is still, we're seeing some of these carriers that have fairly agreeable practices on the Medicare side of things, and an intent to transfer, not having anything related on the ACA side of things.
They'll hold their book of business forever.
Yeah, holding their book. It's the stone ages on some of those policies. So if you're one of our carrier partners out there on the ACA side of things, it's time to get with the program, because it's making it very, very difficult, because all it benefits it just benefits the people that were there first that had those contracts, and there's no incentive for them to keep performing and keep operating
or provide value.
Yeah, and provide value. It's like, well, hey, screw you, agent. I don't need to do anything for you because you're trapped. What are you going to do anyway? We've been the victim of that as many times throughout our career. Yep. And agents, what happens is if they're trying to grow their business, they'll just get frustrated and they just leave. Ultimately, it doesn't benefit anybody but that current upline or FMO to have a policy like that.
And then I think over time, if that carrier that they're writing significantly ever degrades their product, their network changes or anything else like that, then that broker is going to do anything they can to not write business for you. And so I think it harms ultimately in the long run the carrier by having a policy like that. Kind of like the going dark thing back in the day. Well, who wins if a broker's writing your product and then wants to move to do business with another distributor, and you have to make them go dark for 6 or 12 months, you're all hurting yourselves. You're all losing business. Makes no sense.
Yeah, I remember you called me twice, and you're like, hey, you can't write this carrier for 6 months. You got to go dark while we're moving. I'm like, okay.
All right. And it happens.
I guess these other people are getting these products in the meantime.
Yep, they are. Yes, they are. So I would also say that there's a couple things too that I want to kind of dispel or put out there too and people get caught up in this, and I have brokers ask me all the time, should I contract and do business as just myself, as like contract as like Dan Hardle, or do I contract as an entity? And what's the difference? Like, Amy, what would you kind of advice would you give people or talk about?
So I always tell people, if you're planning on having downlines, you have current downlines, let's contract you as an agency. But if you're not having people under you, don't bother with it. Assign your commissions to an EIN.
Yep.
And then move forward that way, and you can still have all of the tax write-offs and everything like that as a standard business. Mm-hmm. But you have to purchase licenses, maintain licenses. Some of the states, they are such a pain to get a business license.
New York, Florida, California,
blue states.
Yeah, it's true. You have to pay filing fee. You have to file your tax returns, Secretary of State fees, affiliation fees.
Well, and like Virginia, we actually had one of our sub-agencies that Virginia just termed his agency license. He had no clue. And it was because they were taking his money every month for him paying a broker fee or something, but they weren't applying it to his agency. And
Virginia and a couple other states, like, you actually have to have a physical presence there. And so there's third-party services you can pay, like law firms, to have a physical presence that they file there. That's like one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some red tape in some of these states.
Good point, because that is a question we get asked all the time. And first of all, consult your tax professional, consult your CPA. Don't take our word for it, but what we get all the time is independent agents have their own business, and they are their own business. And so they think, I've got to set up this fancy organization and entity to create with the carriers and contract my entity like that. And a lot of times there's what they perceive as a tax advantage or a corporate structure may not necessarily be there. And on the other side of things, it unnecessarily complicates and makes things more expensive and more messy.
True.
So
I would say two things. One, it took us 2 years as an organization to get set up with every single state. It's not, just so people know, it's not as easy as just saying, like, you know what, it's $50,000 to get. I would write that check in a second and just do it. It is not that easy. With some of these states, like I said, you have to do business under a different name that's approved in the state. You have to file paperwork with the Secretary of State. You sometimes have to affiliate or associate a principal and pay a fee to be attached to that entity in the state. There's a lot of work. And then the DOI in the state has to match up with, like, the Department of Consumer Services or the Secretary of State. There is a lot that sometimes goes into that, just so that you're all aware.
Yeah.
So to Amy's point, there's two ways to kind of, or methodologies to do it. Is one, you can always contract with a lot of carriers personally with your social. You can still go file an LLC or an S Corp and just assign your commissions there. And that's easy to just, that way if you add states and you're going to sell in 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 states, you just get your personal license. And then the money that you're making, you can a lot of time fill out, like, United Healthcare, an assignment of commission form. Yep. Humana calls it an ABTF form, right? Where you can assign, like, the money that Dan would earn. Instead of paying me, it just goes to that entity, and you can still, have that tax ID and get those tax breaks, to your point.
Yeah.
And not have to double pay for licenses and do all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
The caveat to that is there are carriers out there. I'm going to specifically name, I think it was Cigna, Molina, off the top of my head. Who else? There's a couple of them that won't let you hold a contract higher than street commissions. If you want to have a commission level higher than that, then you have to have a tax ID and you have to contract as an entity, not under you personally.
Yeah, and I think as of right now, UHC is the only one that allows you
to have a hierarchy of agents and a downline, and and I don't know how this is all going to factor into plan year 2025 and the new rulings and what's an agency and what's not an agency and the services that they do. But it begs the question, right, of, we're really, as an FMO, paid for all these services we provide. We're talking about onboarding and contracting and technology and all these things we do. And there's people out there, they go, well, why are we paying administrative fees to Bob Johnson, whatever, that doesn't even have an office and doesn't have a staff and doesn't have anything.
Or a compliance team or compliance officer or policies, and yet they're
an
somehow,
agency.
an agency.
And so I think that's just something to keep in mind too, if you're out in the marketplace and you're thinking about your current situation or your future path. Those are situations in which you want to have your entity set up with a tax ID. You're getting the licenses, you're paying the fees, and you're going through all the heartache if that is your goal to grow a larger organization long term.
And I always tell people, if you don't currently have downlines, but you want to get there, let's contract you as an individual right now. Then when you're ready to have downlines, we can contract you as an agency. But what a lot of people don't realize too is you have to contract as an individual and then as an agency. So you have to do double the work, and you can't contract as an agency until your individual is active.
Right.
So unless you have people to put under you, it's way more of a headache for the agent to go through all of that for a maybe.
As my dad would say, they're putting the cart before the horse.
Yes.
And entity.
And people
And
don't
they always
realize
do that.
too that some carriers are, when we submit your packets, your void check with your bank account has to match up to the entity name and the E&O. And so depending on the carrier, some of them are sloppy and they don't check. I'll just be honest, they don't. But other carriers will flag it and come back and reject the contract and say, this this bank void check and account does not match the name on the contract and does not match up with the E&O. All three of those things have to match and line up, or else we reject.
Yep.
So,
and one way that I have seen people get around that is you have your name and your business name on every document. If you have it on your voided check, your individual name and your business, you're fine.
See all these different complications and nuances, and then we get the agents that are reaching out frustrated to Amy and her team and to us, and like, why is this and taking this long? And it's like, so again, peek behind the curtain of all this stuff that goes on.
Yeah, so to kind of give you perspective from like us too, and again, how the sausage is made. We're getting a packet in, and then obviously from there we have alerts, we have triggers immediately. Like when someone executes a contract in our systems, we're immediately notified, and multiple parties. It even automates out a message in Slack. We all know there's a whole work queue. It immediately gets picked up. We review it. We start our processes immediately. The agent's notified. So I feel like we have very good processes there. Again, then we actually have to take that packet, and we've automated it to flow all that data into our internal CRM. So I've even had an agent before tell me like, you spelled my name wrong or something. I was like, you spelled your own name wrong on your packet. Because all we did was ingest the information that you put on your onboarding packet. And it's like, oh, and I actually showed them like their packet. And that's like, that's why your name is wrong, or your phone number is wrong, or your social is wrong. Yep. You screwed up. You probably onboarded on your mobile phone with us and did that. So anyways, but then we actually start putting into motion an activity or like a trigger for every single staff member, like whichever contracting rep is on your team gets an assignment, right? They get assigned it, and they have an activity, and there's actually an activity per each contract for that agent, correct?
Yeah.
So if an agent onboards and they fill out a packet for 17 carriers, 17 activities just got made and assigned to a staff member.
Yep. And then the nice thing too is we've actually gone in and taken it a step further. For every step of every carrier, we get an additional activity that We say that the link was sent to an agent. Boom, we get an activity assigned for us for 3 days out to check if the agent completed the link.
Right.
And for every step of the way for all of the different processes for each one of those carriers.
Yeah, so we're always going through and putting touch points in, like the status, and we're changing the status and updating the status. And based on what needs to happen, we're setting those activity triggers, whether it be day 3, day 30. And a common thing in the industry is 90 days. Like a form was submitted to a carrier like Humana.
Yeah.
We send off that form to Humana, and 90 days later, we know we can complete a contract, because the reality is we never get releases from other people. I'll just throw it out there and say, guess what? We actually do release people a fair amount. Like, how many releases did we process this year?
I counted yesterday for the last month, and we've processed 8.
Yeah. So
Just how many apps those 8 people wrote?
0. But we released them. And
we'll talk about that in a minute.
The point is, though, like, how many contracts have we processed this year where their FMO or prior employee released them?
I can probably count on both of my hands.
In the entire
The
year.
amount.
It
Yeah.
just never, it doesn't happen very often, to be candid with you. It's gotten worse, we found. But to the credit, though, years ago, you know, again, you're having to go dark 12 months or 6 months or whatever else, or terminate your contract. And now the carrier self-release process is pretty easy for most carriers in the Medicare world. It's an email to a certain inbox, or it's fill out a form, and usually like 90 days later, you're with a new partner.
And
right?
you can still write business the whole time. So there's
Yep.
no detriment to your current situation.
Yeah. So like, I don't think, for me, we tell everybody, we don't care about the release stuff. If your FMO is going to give you release or not, we don't care. We'll onboard you at 90 days.
Put in your intents.
Yeah, put it all in. 90 days is not a big deal. By the time, you know, we start doing business together, you get acclimated to our systems, we start working together, you know, that lines up with that kind of onboarding phase anyway. So 90 days is definitely not a barrier to entry, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
So,
Do we want to talk about like LOA or teledigital contracts and then wrap with releases? Because we got
where are we at? We have 5 more
15 more minutes.
Oh, okay. We're good. So yeah, but let's talk. We are different than a lot of FMOs too, in that we have both teledigital or call center as well as field. And depending on the carrier, like, again, I'll be very specific. Humana, we have 2 completely different SAN IDs. Like, we have a different contract for like call center and a different one for traditional agents. And so we have to identify what type of agent is onboarding with us. Are they an employed call center agent, or is this just a street agent? And then depending on that, we have a different roster we put them on, correct?
Yep.
And so that's different. And sometimes that's important, just so everyone's listening knows, like, when we onboard an agent with their contract on, let's say, teledigital, there's different, you know, compliance metrics and components that they adhere to. Like, they look at the agent, if there's ever CTMs or compliance things, and go, oh, okay, this is a call center agent. And so that, you know, different kind of thresholds and expectations there versus a field agent. That's why it kind of matters, because there's different protocols and how you do business. And there's also a different certification for a teledigital agent versus a field agent. So that's why it matters. So those listening, just remember, if you leave, I'm just talking like a Humana specific thing. If you leave a job as a telesales agent somewhere and you onboard with an FMO, it's likely that you're going to have to do another certification over again as a field agent. That's just one of the little nuances there.
Yeah. And the hard thing, like with Humana specifically, that's usually where we see that is with Humana. They don't notify us that you need to do your certs again.
Right.
They'll just move you to active. So then we have to be proactive and say, hey, we got notice, you got this also, but you may need to go in and do additional certifications. So go into your producer university, whatever it is, look for these specific certs. If they're done, great. If you were a telesales agent, you for sure will have to do these.
Yep. 100%. The other thing telesales you'll find common too, a really common practice, is that, like, WellCare is a little different, where we have one contract, but we have one roster, and we can onboard and specify whether it's like field or teledigital and which kind of identifier to put them on. So, but everybody works slightly different. But what I will say is, it's very rare that whether you are terminated, resign, if you leave a call center environment, it's rare that you're walking out the door with your release.
Yeah.
It just, and I will even
Very rare.
Very rare. They don't do it. And I'll even tell you, like, GoHealth's the worst of all of them. They'll hold you for 6 months, like, just frankly, like that's all that we've seen. Their policy is it's a 6-month hold, you know, and it's just there's no ability. So any of your carriers that you were contracted with of them, they're going to hold those for 6 months, and we can't even process pay like get you onboarded for at least those 6 months if that's where somebody was.
Yep.
Yeah. So do we want to talk about LOAs real quick? So we kind of so LOAs. What does it stand for?
Just line of authority.
Line of authority.
Or licensed only agent, you know, or you hear like solicitors are also like in that same like grouping or classification.
So basically, the way that an LOA agent is, and we're very transparent with this because we have LOA agents. All of our usually, if you're a W-2 employee, you are an LOA agent, meaning you write those policies on the behalf of your upline, and your upline owns those policies. You do not own that. We are very overly explicit whenever we're contracting somebody as an LOA, but many people out there, many sub-agencies, it's usually smaller agencies, are maybe not as transparent. And a lot of times agents get contracted as an LOA agent and they're thinking they're building a book of business for themselves, and they're not. They're building a book that's owned by somebody else. And I've seen bad circumstances where I've seen agents work 3 to 5 years where they're getting paid their commissions from their upline, and then they go to, you know, leave or something changes, and then they realize they don't own any of those policies, you know. And, you know, we certainly try to be. So what are some, besides, you know, a W-2 employee, what are some other reasons why somebody may be an LOA agent? So
the biggest thing that we see is commission advances. Like we have a program. So like we are pretty transparent in saying like we're Switzerland. Like you can be an independent agent and be direct pay right from the carrier, own your book of business. You can work with us and be an employee, or you could, if you don't have the funds and the resources and the ability to do that, the biggest thing is, I mean, we don't need to talk at length, but it's just the commissions and the finances in this industry and how long it takes to get paid. And so for a lot of people, they just don't have the runway and they can't wait months and months in order to get paid their commissions. And so I would say that that's the most common reason that we see agents want to be an LOA, is the fact that, you know, we'll offer them commission advancing for the first year or two. You sell a policy as long as it gets, you know, accepted or is going to be enrolled, we'll pay them a partial commission advance, and that gives them the financial runway to keep going.
Yeah, what I've also seen is other, you know, people in the industry will make people LOA if they're going to give them leads or other resources where maybe the independent agent doesn't have the funds or the resources to be able to invest and build those. So as a trade-off, they're in an ecosystem or a structure where they're getting those things, but they're taking a lesser commission or an alternative commission model that's out there from just FMV from the government, right?
Yeah, and I would say, like, I'm great with those arrangements, and I think carriers are too. In an ideal world, like, that's that trade-off, that's that discussion that is being had, right? And I think we try to be very. Here's what I find, though. Agents go, I want to pick the favorite things that I like about this type of an agent. I want to combine them with the elements and the things that I like from this type of an agent. And I want to combine these three together and piece these all together into what I think is the perfect thing for me. And that doesn't exist. And so I think we've had agents over the years be like, hey, I want to have a commissions advance. It's like, how am I going to advance you your commissions? They get paid directly to you from the carrier. How am I going to advance them to you? Oh yeah, good point. You know, just those kind of scenarios, right? Where it's just not feasible.
So always advice, understand when you're working with us or any other upline or entity, understand how you're contracting yourself, what you're getting yourself into, read the fine print, read the paperwork, make sure you know.
Well, I think the key points are who pays you.
Yep.
Does the carrier pay you directly, or does the agency or the upline? And then who owns the book of business at the end of the day? Who is it that actually owns the policy? Is it you or is it the other entity? And if the other entity owns it, do you have any sort of other agreement? Like, for example, we'll give our agents that are LOAs an agreement with us that says, hey, if you complete the terms of this or you vest and you're an LOA, then, you know, you will always be paid these earned commissions or owed commissions indefinitely. You know what I mean? Whether we can transfer the policies to you in the book of business or whether we hold that book of business, but we're legally required to continue to pay you. We try to spell that out very clearly and definitively for people. But frequently we run into those scenarios where it isn't clear, it's not spelled out, it wasn't explained well, and it leaves the agents in a very bad circumstance or situation.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap with releases, because I think that it's always a hot topic. It's always, people are going to be interested in why and how and why can't I get released, and it's something that I always see people complaining about on social media, on Facebook groups, on forums, on things like that. And so as we talked this whole episode about the time and effort that goes into it, so I just want to, what we see a lot of times, guys, is most agents consume resources and cost entities money. They don't actually ever generate money for these uplines and entities. And a lot of times that frustrates people to hear, but the reality is we see these, I call them.
But understand in the middle of that, like you're explaining though, that's why the insurance carriers have us as IMOs, FMOs, whatever, because we are doing and performing that work and service for them. And the carriers recognize the money and the technology and the staff and the resources that we have to put into it. And that is why the insurance carriers leave the release processes, and if you're going to release or not, up to the FMOs, and it's at their discretion, because it's their businesses that they're investing and spending and doing. And that's why you can't just complain to the carrier and circumvent the FMO and have the carrier release you.
Yeah. And so I've seen this proliferation of what I call FMO hoppers over the past 4 or 5 years. And they're these agents that it's like nothing's ever good enough for them. They've been with every FMO and upline. It's always somebody else's fault other than their own. They're never in a system or an ecosystem where they're able to be successful. And I think a lot of it is because they've never listened to a podcast like this, and they don't know actually how much time and effort and cost goes into setting them up. And then it's like, oh yeah, well, I got this other thing. I saw this other presentation that I thought I liked more. Pull the ripcord, push this button over here, shoot me over a release. And a lot of these people are doing is wasting a lot of collective time and effort and resources. And so let me give you an example. Like you decided you wanted the contract with us, and you were with a prior upline. Let's say you came from a call center. This is very, very typical. This happens all the time. Well, your contracts are going to be encumbered. We're going to have, let's say you decide you want to go on this journey and be an independent agent, and you decide you want to write 15 carriers with us. So you decide, you go through, you make that decision for yourself, and then our team goes to work and puts in many hours, and we're compensating, Amy and her team and our other staff, and
the data team who's doing nipper flows.
Yeah, data team, technology,
systems.
And at some point we'll be able to probably quantify an exact cost, an exact dollar amount, but it's in the tune of thousands of dollars generally. I would guess somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000
just to onboard an agent.
To onboard an agent each time when you decide that you want to go join an upline, right? Well, let's say what we see is, I got this other job. Now give me a release after I put your company, and not only our company, but the insurance carrier partners, because they don't want people jumping around all the time too, because it's work and time and effort, labor on their end, their side of things too. And so
they paid for a background check.
Correct. So you've generated multi-$1,000s worth of expenditures by your decision to join these organizations. And then a lot of times we'll see someone, I got offered something, or I want to go, this new shiny object was presented.
I got a Walmart booth.
Yeah, this person offered me this or that, give me a release. And it's not like we don't just go into the account and say, push the eject button and undoes everything, and it's as simple as that. What happens then is, now who has to release? The principal. So a principal like Dan has invested already thousands of dollars into your staff. And then what do you have to do? Now somebody has to chase down the owner or the executive of this entity and spend more time and more effort to get this person a release, right? And it's like you're throwing good money after bad after somebody.
Well, and it's not even that, Mike, too. You're right. It's good money after bad. And now we have to spend money to get you gone.
Yes.
After we already spent money to get you on board. But the other thing is, like some of them, it's just letterhead, where I can put on letterhead your agent's name, NPN, we release, we document it on letterhead, sign it, done. But there's other carriers that require a specific form that's their own, and there's multiple carriers that way. So then I have to download and use different forms forms, specific, send it to the agent. There's other carriers that we have to go into the portal. We have to log in. We have to do a couple of steps in order to terminate them in the portal. And so it's not just like, oh, hey, just send me that one letter. There's, to your point, there's more work that goes into releasing them from all of that.
Correct.
So.
And then what happens is you're now blowing up Amy and her team. Like, I need this letter and this letterhead, and it's not good enough. And now all of a sudden, this already time and money sink is now becoming a further pain in the butt headache, and oftentimes acting very rude, very entitled. Well, why won't you do this? Why won't you give me this? And then starts threatening. We see this all the time in the industry. I'm going to file this, or I'm going to tell this person. It's like, my friend, you caused this situation, and now you are expecting other people to clean up the mess you made, right?
Yep.
And so I'm only taking that. I don't think I've never seen it explained like that to agents out in the market, but that's oftentimes why our competitors and everybody just kind of goes, hey, there's just no releases, right? Because most of the time, they're from agents who have never actually produced any income generating activities for their entities. All they're doing is going around acting like time and resource costs.
Well, and I would add to that too, that, the whole expression, you're going to catch more flies with honey than vinegar, which is very true too.
Yeah.
And I would just say, like, there are days that I really do feel bad for you and some of the staff members and things where, we've had terrible situations where, brokers call in and just treat our staff so miserably and horribly, and the things that they say and do. And these are people who have been bending over backwards for them, who have been polite, who have been kind, who have been fielding their calls, sometimes after hours, sometimes going the extra mile. And then, weeks later, when their situation has changed, their personal life or whatever, now they're beating up somebody on the phone and just being terrible and abusive. And there's even times that I'll just even say, publicly, that sometimes there's agents that begin the onboarding process and they talk rudely, they talk down to our staff, they treat them terribly, and I will intervene. And there's been a couple times you've had me intervene and say, let's not process their contract, send it back to the agent. We don't want their business. We don't need their business. We don't want those kind of relationships, and I don't want them talking to our staff that way. Right? There's been a couple of those.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We just don't take it when someone's cursing at our staff, they're calling them slurs, or they're doing other things like that. We just
threatening.
It's just one of those things that we try to steer clear of, and we want to choose and like the partners and the agents that we're working with. Candidly.
Yeah. And having said that, we release more than anybody I've known in the industry. And like to Dan's point, you get more with honey rather than poop, whatever.
Vinegar.
Vinegar,
Catch
whatever.
More flies with honey than vinegar.
Yeah, whatever the analogy is.
You get two to wrap it up.
Yeah, they. When an agent comes to us and there's certain situations where it's like, hey, I made this mistake, I've got this other job, can you hook me up? A lot of times that goes much further than if you're like, I took this other job. You guys think, there's no thanks, there's no gratitude, there's no recognition of the effort that, Amy and her team and the resource have put in. And it's like this entitlement expectation out of nowhere that really doesn't get you anywhere, And so,
well, and I would say that that's just not our organization, but anywhere, regardless of who you're doing business with, just remember that employer, that FMO, that IMO, that agency, they really do have a say whether they are going to give you a release or not, and it's at their discretion. I also see that a lot of times the FMOs like try to pass the buck and say that they don't, but they really do. They have the ability to do that. So, can just keep that in mind as you're having those discussions with them.
Yeah.
Well, and we are starting to see too with certain carriers that they won't allow you, even if we were to give you a release, they won't allow you to change hierarchies if you've already done it in a certain amount of time.
A 12-month period.
Correct.
Yeah. And we've done that.
That was very common years ago.
Yeah.
UHC and Aetna are specific ones, I'll say. They'll only allow a hierarchy change once every 12 months. So if you've already hopped, FMO to FMO, they could give you a release, but you're still not going anywhere.
Yeah. And UHC won't even allow you to put in an intent to transfer either. Outside of that period, they'll say you can put that in on this date.
Yep. Every 12 months. So to wrap up, because we got to go, I love this stuff and we could talk about it all day. But Amy, any last words, advice, comments, that you'd like to add to wrap?
Really just, if you don't know the process, it might get you further if you ask, hey, what does this entail? We are always more than happy to tell people exactly how much of an effort we have to put in or the steps that they need to take from start to finish, and then maybe make a decision from there. Also, keep a spreadsheet with your passwords, who your upline is. We have to help out with that a lot, and we can't always get the answers for you.
Don't you know, Amy? I don't have an upline. I'm direct with the carrier.
Yeah. Amy, how do I log into my email on my iPad?
Yep.
I don't have an FMO. I'm direct.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have an upline.
Good advice. On that note, I think we'll wrap. But Amy, you've been great. I appreciate it as always.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you so
me.
much. Thanks, guys.